Good evening, and welcome to this year's Emancipation Week keynote lecture sponsored by the Center for Studying Structures of Race. Before I introduce our speaker, Dr. Whitney Battle-Baptiste, I'd like to give you more information about what we as a community are celebrating this evening. Almost 2 years ago, Roanoke College officially recognized for the first time celebrations of our newest federal holiday, Juneteenth. In addition to recognizing Juneteenth, the college also started a new campus tradition of recognizing the more specific histories of emancipation in this part of Virginia that came in April of 1865 when Confederate forces were finally defeated and the Civil War ended. It is important to note, of course, that there is a long tradition of emancipation celebrations in Virginia that Roanoke College has only recently joined. In the 1890s, for example, both Salem and Roanoke were home to emancipation clubs that held annual celebrations of the Emancipation Proclamation. These were important events that were typically attended by more than 3,000 African Americans from Southwest Virginia. In more recent years, and well before the federal government finally recognized Juneteenth, community members have regularly gathered for annual Juneteenth celebrations in the Roanoke Valley. Celebrations of emancipation at Roanoke College are part of a larger set of projects dedicated to deepening our understanding of the ways in which the college took part in and benefited from enslavement, segregation, and the perpetuation of white supremacy. During Emancipation Week celebrations convened last year, we unveiled 2 plaques on the administration building that honor the enslaved workers whose expert knowledge and artisanal skill made our campus a physical reality. This year, we are convening amidst a newly launched initiative to build a permanent work of monumental public art dedicated to enslaved persons from Southwest Virginia. Tonight's lecture is part of a larger lecture series that encourages us to think expansively about how we might commemorate histories that too often remain hidden in plain sight. The series will culminate with a lecture by Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. on April 19th. Tomorrow and Friday of this week, the Center for Studying Structures of Race will host the Virginia Conference on Race, during which students from 13 colleges and universities in Virginia will present original research that critically evaluates race from a variety of scholarly perspectives. Please join me in attending these events. Tonight's keynote lecture will be presented by Dr. Whitney Battle-Baptiste, Director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Center and Professor of Anthropology at the University of Massachusetts-Amherst. Dr. Battle-Baptiste is the author of Black Feminist Archaeology, published in 2011, and co-editor of W.E.B. Du Bois's Data Portraits, Visualizing Black America, published in 2019. Her research focuses on the connections of race, gender, class, and sexuality during slavery and post-emancipation. Dr. Battle-Baptiste has participated in archaeological excavations at Colonial Williamsburg, the Hermitage, the Rich Neck Plantation in Virginia, the W.E.B. Du Bois boyhood home site in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and the Millars Plantation on the Bahamian island of Eleuthera. Through her work as director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Center, Dr. Battle-Baptiste expands discussion and scholarship of W.E.B. Du Bois and promotes conversation around issues involving race, labor, and social injustice throughout the world. I am very proud to note that the W.E.B. Du Bois Center and the Center for Studying Structures of Race enjoy a standing partnership that has been to date enormously rewarding. Dr. Battle-Baptiste, thank you for being here tonight. At the conclusion of your talk, I will moderate a question and answer session with the audience. And so audience members, please enter your questions at any time into the Q&A feature that's located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So without further ado, Dr. Battle-Baptiste, thank you so much and welcome.
I'm doing a webinar. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jesse, for having me. I'm going to share my screen now. And we're going to be talking specifically tonight about visualizing scientific data on race and the reasons behind kind of what I think is very important and very telling of having this conversation at this time during your celebration of Emancipation Week is that Du Bois's 1900 exhibit was really focused on showing the world on a global stage the progress of African Americans from emancipation to, at that time, what was present, 1899 and 1900. So I feel that it's extremely telling that the ways in which Du Bois used his used data was to highlight the connections between the lived lives of the living experiences of African Americans and the African American past, and how often the idea of the African American past is conflated with slavery. So I want to start off by giving you some examples of the archaeology that I have done. I am a senior scholar now, so I don't dig as much as I used to, but I have been very active in trying to not only recruit, but mentor African Americans into the field of historical or post-contact archaeology. It's very important for us to be a part of the conversation from everywhere, from the ideas of actually excavating on plantations, but not focusing on the great house, right? Focusing on a majority of the people that lived and labored on these plantations and the homes they occupied, and trying to tell the story and ask slightly different questions than archaeologists have asked in the past. These are on either ends are archaeology photos of me much younger at the Hermitage Plantation, the home of Andrew Jackson. And in the middle, a former student who's now a prominent archaeologist and a doctor at University of Kentucky, Elena Sesma, and myself, and one of our collaborators is George, and we are actually on the island of Eleuthera by one of the remains that dates back to slavery on the island of Eleuthera in the Bahamas. Excavations didn't happen there. And part of the reason why is that archaeology, contemporary archaeology, it moves beyond the idea of excavating, finding artifacts, and that's where the story stops. Like, we interpret it and that's it. What we also do, and what Elena's work and her dissertation was on the island of Eleuthera, was about kind of understanding the complexity of the story of slavery on this particular island through the memories of descendants who actually had control over 2,000 acres that was formerly a plantation. So I want to give you a broader sense of what it is that I do as an archaeologist, and ensure you that this is kind of beyond the idea of simply talking about artifacts. And hopefully I can get my slides to progress. Okay, so here is an elder W.E.B. Du Bois. And I want to start here because he was born in 1868, which was 3 years post the Emancipation Proclamation. That was in 1865. And then he passed away in Accra, Ghana, at the age of 95, on the eve of the March on Washington, which was 1963. So he lived through Reconstruction. He lived through the Great Depression. He lived through the concepts of scientific racism, also known as eugenics. And he lived through the McCarthy era, where he was under attack constantly, and at the age of 81 was actually put on trial for being a part of a peace organization. And he also kind of lived through desegregation and toward the civil rights movement. So he saw so much and contributed so much that I want to kind of bring down the bigness of Du Bois, right? And I want to talk to you specifically about him as a human being, him as a father, as a husband, and kind of contextualize the work that he did, because what I really want to emphasize tonight is that I want to talk about the shift that Du Bois had from scientist and focused on the sociology of and the details of life for African Americans, to talking specifically to African Americans about how the past and the present can influence us toward the concept of liberation. So I want to start, not most people start in Great Barrington. Yes, he was born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and I'm coming to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts, a little bit further east than he was from, but nonetheless, he was a son of Massachusetts. He attended Fisk University, which is a historically Black college located in Nashville, Tennessee. And from there, he went to the only place that he had dreamed of going, which was Harvard University. A little known fact is that not only did he get his PhD from Harvard, he also got an additional bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD. It wasn't because he wanted to have accumulation of degrees. It was actually because Harvard barely recognized his bachelor's or his primary schooling at Fisk University based on the fact that it was a historically Black college. So he had to redo a bachelor's and then did a master's and a PhD. He also studied in Germany at what is now Humboldt University in Berlin. And he learned a lot. He learned a lot, not from secondary sources and people who were teaching this new and innovative and interesting field called sociology. He actually went to the source, which was Germany, to learn from the very founders and the very people who were thinking critically about the daily lives of ordinary men and women. He returned to teach at Wilberforce University after he received his PhD from Harvard. Wilberforce is located in Ohio, and it is also a historically Black college. Du Bois really expected to gain a prominent job at a prominent university, preferably an Ivy League, but that didn't happen. And I hope that you can follow what my logic is, but it was based on the fact that he was African American, that he could not secure a job in one of these institutions. So Wilberforce is where he started. He did not last very long at Wilberforce, based on what he describes as much more of a kind of religious lean, more than he was comfortable with. He was not teaching history or sociology or political thought. He was teaching specifically much more toward religious based studies. The one amazing benefit thing that came out, or good thing that came out of Wilberforce, is that he met his wife, Nina Gomer, who was from Ohio, and they were married. Yes, she was a student of his originally, but she was actually a non-traditional and actually an older student. So they were actually contemporaries. So they moved to Philadelphia, where he conducted the research, living in the very context of the area of the people he was interviewing to collect data for what became the Philadelphia Negro. It was a fellowship through UPenn. And again, he thought that this amazing study that became this huge tome called the Philadelphia Negro would secure him a position at UPenn. It did not. So he and his wife moved to Atlanta, where he began his time at Atlanta University. So here is one clear picture and two kind of blurry pictures about some of the areas and some of the details from the Philadelphia Negro. So forgive the blurriness. I need glasses, but I can also tell that these are blurry. But I also want you to see the visualizations of the ways in which he was articulating and seeing where people were living, what they did as a job, as an occupation, and how they interacted with each other, how the segregation of Philadelphia affected their chances for upward mobility and economic security in the United States. Here is and I really apologize for using cursor, but hopefully you can see the cursor. This here is W.E.B. Du Bois. And this is one of the early photos. This is him, I want to say, this is Atlanta University. As you can see, there are many. Actually, no, I'm sorry. This is Wilberforce. But historically Black colleges were still maintained and being taught often by white Americans who were teaching at historically Black colleges. And in the center right here is a very rare picture of Nina Gomer as a student there. So now I'm going to fast forward quickly to Atlanta. There is a moment in Du Bois's life where he has established himself as a sociologist, as a professor at Atlanta University, working with other incredible sociologists, as well as giving Du Bois the opportunity to actually train young men and women in the science and the expertise of sociological study, from collecting data to researching property ownership, entrepreneurship, all these kinds of things that I will refer to when I talk specifically about the exhibit. But I'm showing you this huge headline because it was in 1899, which was one, the year when the Philadelphia Negro was published. Number two, it is when Du Bois was approached by an alum of Fisk University and a friend of Du Bois, Thomas Calloway, who had a position in the government, and with the sanction of Booker T. Washington, was able to secure funding and find a curator for what would become the American, Negro exhibit, the American Negro exhibit in 1900 that was viewed in Paris. So this is 1899. Du Bois is on his way to the offices of the Atlanta Constitution, a newspaper, where he has penned what he would describe as a fiery kind of what we would call an op-ed today, to be published in the Atlanta Constitution, specifically about lynching, specifically about bringing attention to all of the ways that he felt that data and education and all of these things would help the lives of individuals who were under this oppressive moment, especially in the South. And so he was walking down the street, and on that very street, he learned that there was a butcher shop that had the knuckle bones of Sam Holes, who had recently been lynched, and they were on display in the window. He said he literally was stopped in his tracks. And at that point, he realized that data alone was not going to save African America. He realized that data alone was not going to shift the tide to save the lives of African Americans who were increasingly becoming the victims way after the emancipation of African Americans, way after Reconstruction had abruptly ended. Lynching had become something that was happening much more frequently. But this particular one was very telling as he's in the process of trying to figure out what this exhibit is going to be. Unfortunately, about a month after that, or a month around the same time, Du Du Bois and his wife experienced a tragedy. It is the death of their only son, Burgard Du Bois, who is pictured here. He passes away at 18 months. He became ill with diphtheria and could have been saved, but he wasn't able to take Du Bois wasn't able to take his son to a hospital and did not get a doctor to come and be able to figure out how to help his son in time, and he passed away. Du Bois did not bury Burgard or his wife Nina in Atlanta or in Baltimore, where Nina eventually came to live most of her life. He buried both of them in Great Barrington with other Burgard members of his mother's maternal family. So that's I'm giving you kind of a glimpse a little bit about where Du Bois was in this moment. I like to show this. This is actually not in Atlanta. Excuse me. This is at the offices of the NAACP, but and the Crisis magazine. But I really, really want to just, because I'm a visual person, so I just want to show you the impact that Du Bois's propaganda began to have on the ways in which African Americans saw themselves, the ways in which they were able to engage on a national level. And part of that was this move from data to propaganda. And also 1902-03 is when the Souls of Black Folk come out. So you're talking about Du Bois as really being a catalyst for what he hopes is change. Here are just some pictures of Thomas Callaway on the left here, on my left, and W.E.B. Du Bois in some fancy attire in Paris. I do want to say that he spent so much of the funding on the materials for the exhibit that he could not afford to get to Paris. And Du Bois had the personality where he had to be, not calling him a control person, but he really had to be in the space that the exhibit was, because he had to make sure that everything was perfect. So he went from Atlanta or New York to Paris on the bottom, on steerage, at like dirt poor money. He had no money because he really had to scrape up money to get to Paris to be able to be a part of this amazing moment. I do want to contextualize again that you're talking about the Paris Exposition on the world stage. You still at this moment have human zoos with African people or people from the African continent on display. You have kind of this idea of primitivism. And I'm showing this to you because this is the United States Palace of Social Economy, as it was called. And right here where my cursor is moving in circles is where the Negro exhibit was. So it was as soon as you kind of walked in, although there was some other displays, very informal displays, the actual area was right here. It was as soon as you walked in, and there it was on your right. And so it had a really prominent position. This is a really grainy picture. But what I want to show you, and this is actually a recreation of the American Negro exhibit. This is when Thomas Callaway and Du Bois actually showed this in Rochester, New York, of all places. It wasn't seen more than 2 times outside of Paris, but this is just to give you the sheer volume of what the exhibit entailed. And I hope you were talking about emancipation. So right here to the right, we have the quote unquote great emancipator, which would be Abraham Lincoln. And then we would have here Booker T. Washington, whose influence and helped to fund this exhibit. So here along the wall here, you have literature, books written by African Americans. Here we have our data portraits, which are showing and visualizing everything that starts from the transatlantic slave trade to the acquiring of property ownership of African Americans after 1865, the beginnings of entrepreneurship, African-American owned businesses. It was showing historically Black colleges who were training doctors and teachers and agriculturalists, and most HBCUs at this moment, and still to this day, are located in the US South. This on the right is actually from the Paris Exposition. It was a little more contained than what I showed you. In Rochester, they had the opportunity to have the whole space. But this was jam-packed with things and everything related to African-American progress. And on the left here is Du Bois's pass to the Paris Exposition. I'm gonna kind of move a little quickly now because, like I said, I'm a visual learner, but for me as a graduate of a historically Black college, understanding the history and the ability of African Americans to not only gain public school education, which was a benefit from Reconstruction, but also to be able to directly engage and be in spaces that were safe, that were dedicated to the tutelage and to creating and establishing African-American leaders. And I'm not going to get into the talented 10th at this moment, because Du Bois at this point is talking about education as being one of the ways in which liberation can happen. And I would love to answer questions about the talented 10th, because Du Bois lived long enough, fortunately, to have changed his mind about several things, and sometimes more than once. And the truth is that for me, seeing these images are images that I grew up understanding, but actually attending universities that have this history, for me, is invaluable. It's not invaluable. It is so valuable. It's so part of who I am. I think that it was because of being in these spaces that I was able to understand that I could do whatever I put my mind to and I could accomplish. But also writing and doing my own form of propaganda through my archaeology, through my teaching. These are ways that we engage generations to come and hopefully ensure the future. And so I just like to show these because a lot of these images were actually not necessarily openly on display, but there were several plates where you could move through and actually see African-American, young African-American men and women engaging in trades and in historically Black colleges. And this is a group of 4 women in Washington, D.C., and which is the home of Howard University. But also just looking at the ways in which African Americans are being seen in juxtaposition of the ways in which they may have been seen prior to the 1900 exhibit, I think is a huge act of propaganda, but it's also a huge accomplishment for testifying to this idea that historically Black colleges were a cornerstone of the continued dedication to the uplift of African people in the United States. More pictures. This is not moving. Okay. I also want to say that visually, the data portraits, and I will confess, Britt Russard, my co-editor, and I believe that it was not Du Bois who chose these colors or colored this stuff in. A lot of this information was tabulated and collected by his students and colleagues. And it's just a testament to the collaborative efforts of the Atlanta School of Sociology. But I really wish we had the names of the students that participated in developing and the materials for the exhibit. And what I kind of want to bring it around to come to a close is the fact that I'm talking to Roanoke College, it's no doubt that you all know, being in Virginia, although it's a little Western, because the school I went to was in Petersburg, Virginia State University, and then I went to the College of William and Mary, so I spent many years in the state of Virginia, is this inability for Northerners to really acknowledge the impact that the South had on African-American life and African-American success. And again, there was conflict between Booker T. Washington's concept of cast down your buckets, and the 5 fingers of a hand are separate, but they're still on one hand. These are the Atlanta Compromise speech, where Du Bois was pushing African Americans to move beyond agriculture and to move beyond the South, to use education as that liberatory practice. But for me, it's about home ownership. It's about community, which what Du Bois saw in Philadelphia was very different. It was the inability of movement. It was how segregation actually limited the abilities that he was starting to see, where he could see later on that was happening in places like Atlanta, and not to tone down the idea of racism and the idea that there were, the Jim Crow era was alive and well. There are varying degrees to the importance of African Americans in the South, and for the world to see that the South could be explained and understood beyond the concept of slavery. I also like this photograph because of this infographic, because it's titled "Assess Valuation of All Taxable Property Owned by Georgia Negroes," and you have the different years. 1875 is in the center. Then you have 1885, and then 1890. But to me, it's the ways in which the numbers are like stabbing in. It is literally breaking down kind of the stereotypes of the inability of African Americans to actually be successful. This is Britt Russert and I who edited this great book, with Mabel O. Wilson, Eldon Morris, as well as the amazing Silas Monroe, who helped us really articulate and interpret each one of these data portraits. So I want to end with a picture of a younger Du Bois, but a picture of Du Bois who changed over time, but I feel changed, especially with his book, Black Reconstruction, in some ways, his forgotten contribution to the way we understand the history of African Americans in this country, the history of African peoples in this hemisphere, and also the ideas that if we think globally, are acting locally is not only much more of an influence, we're much stronger, and we are able to see beyond our own neighborhood to be able to understand the impact and the influence that we have on each other as a community and as a collectivity of human beings. So I want to end there, and I thank you for indulging me in speaking very quickly and giving you a lot of information, but I hope there are at least a couple of questions so that I can engage the audience a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Whitney. So we'll dive right into that, really, but thank you so much for your presentation. So the first question is about propaganda and your use of the term propaganda. So the question reads, I typically think of propaganda as something that I should not trust or believe. You've used that word in a less pejorative way. Can you explain what you mean by propaganda in the context of standing against racism? In what ways can propaganda be helpful? How should we weigh different forms of propaganda, especially in this context? Can propaganda be true, and how do we weigh its truth value? So I threw a lot in there at once.
Yeah, propaganda is extremely problematic and dangerous. Propaganda can be used negatively. Propaganda can be used, I think, in many ways, positively, in the sense of, and I'll give a specific example. I briefly mentioned the idea of eugenics. As an anthropologist, I understand that anthropology had a major role in looking at the hierarchy of races, and putting into play the science of eugenics, putting into play who is superior, who is inferior, who is in between, etc. The idea that people of African descent were less than human was a real belief, that there was this way into understanding, because again, race is constructed. You know, I mean, I think that Nicole Hannah-Jones has done an amazing job with 1619, talking about when 1619 rolled around and some folks got off the ship, race, what they did, they were not met as Black people, right? But race is developed as the foundation for which servitude, captivity is based. And so imagine if there's so much being dictated about the less than humanity, the inability to understand the humanity of people of African descent. And in 1903, 1902, 1903, Du Bois publishes The Souls of Black Folk. The title alone is propaganda. The title is propaganda because he's not only dispelling or kind of knocking down in his own way the idea that people of African descent are less than human. We actually have souls. He begins each with a hymn, with music. He's talking about everything from like things he learned from doing the Paris exhibit, things that he learned from conducting research for the Philadelphia Negro. There was so much that he was trying to, about progress. He wrote The Passing of the Firstborn, was about the passing of Burkhardt at 18 months, his son. And it's one of the most compelling chapters for me to read, because it reads and you see the humanity in this man, who is such an amazing scholar, teacher, etc., but who realizes that he talks about the bittersweetness of the loss of his son. It was devastating, but at least his son never knew life under the veil, right? And so he's talking about the inability to create a world where his son, and then later his daughter, who does live and lives a full life, to experience life without racism, to experience life without what he calls the veil. This is where he talks about the problem with the 20th century is the problem with the color line, although the Paris exhibit is the first time that is actually displayed, that sentence. That alone is what I'm talking about in terms of propaganda. He's talking about the color line is the issue, right? Reconstruction should not be called Reconstruction. It should be termed Black Reconstruction. And he talks about it and says what he doesn't understand is why at the time of Reconstruction, you have the emancipation of all these laborers. And then you have this dude named Karl Marx, who's over there across the pond talking about labor and equality and all these kinds of things and understanding the modes of production and benefiting from them. And here you have these laborers coming over here. Du Bois questions, why is it that if they had come together as a labor movement, Black and white or anything else, we could have had an opportunity to have a democracy that's based on the people, right? So he's talking beyond the data, and you know, Black Reconstruction is like 800 pages for a reason. It is so much information. It is really hard to read, but you have to read it in bits and pieces because of the amount of research that he put into that. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of this concept of propaganda. And in Du Bois's case, he's able to use and he wrote fiction, he wrote speculative fiction, which we now call science fiction. And science fiction is very much based in propaganda, because science fiction, Octavia Butler and many other people in terms of contemporary folks look at science fiction as the only space in which Black people are completely free. Like, you can imagine a world, right? And this is that propaganda. It's that idea of what's also termed Afrofuturism. It's the idea that we can dream, what if our society looked like this or that? And so that's what I mean by propaganda. It is finding ways to present data that is, ooh, hello?
We're still here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why my computer just, sorry. And find ways to think beyond what we're told, right? To think beyond and imagine. So that's what I mean by propaganda. I don't mean negative things. I mean propaganda in the positive sense. And I would, say that propaganda was a part of Du Bois's life until the end, in terms of, him at the age of 93 joining the Communist Party USA on purpose, and going to Accra, Ghana at the invitation of Kwame Nkrumah to be at a space where he thought possibly democracy could actually move beyond colonialism and imperialism to be a reality.
Yeah, I got the sense from your talk as well that he realized, the scale of the problem that he was fighting against. So a data-driven approach, for example, or the sort of instrumental bounds of sociology, although still relevant, wasn't totally up to the task of taking on or dismantling race.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're very much in sync with your audience questions, and I'll read the next audience question, but you're very connected here. So it says, given that Du Bois was looking for other modes of engaging the project of liberation, could you speak a little bit about his works of fiction, ranging from the Comet to Dark Princess, etc.?
That's actually a very big question. I would argue that Du Bois used fiction in between the research. I think that it was his way of expression. I think that The Dark Princess was written at a moment where he was in some ways engaging with the struggle in India, the Dalit struggle in terms of untouchables and the rights in India, and very limited correspondence with Ambedkar, but who was one of the composers of the Indian Constitution, but also was part of a huge movement for the rights of Dalits or untouchables. And I think that Du Bois and The Dark Princess is about a story of a South Asian woman, but The Comet is, about everything is gone, right? And what do we have left? Does race still exist? Does So again, it's this speculative, these concepts that are kind of foreign to what he's talking about in his work, but the fiction is a very real part of his expression. And I think that he also wrote The Star of Ethiopia, which is a pageant that was, I don't know, it was many hours and like 800 actors and people. It was only put on twice, 2 or 3 times. Once was at the LA Bowl and once was in New York City. The production was so overwhelming. But I would say that I think that Du Bois's contribution in terms of fiction are very underrated and not really seen as a part of the body of his work. And I feel like they are some of the most important reflections of his work, because I think they they kind of move along with what was going on in his life and what he was thinking about. And also the Crisis magazine, although Jesse Redmond Fawcett had a lot to do with the success of it and the Constant, I think that the Crisis magazine also provided the opportunity for Du Bois to engage with up-and-coming writers, up-and-coming artists, the New Negro movement, the Harlem Renaissance, and engaging with people that were a part of a new vanguard that I would say that Du Bois was extremely, I don't want to say conservative. Apparently he did not like jazz music, and was not really, completely satisfied with, these young whippersnappers running around and writing all this stuff. But he engaged it in a certain kind of way, especially opening up the space in the Crisis for them, and especially for women to publish. Although it only lasted a very short time, the Brownies book was a publication through the Crisis, or connected to the Crisis, that was for African-American children. So he was trying to hit the African-American community at multiple levels. College and university, your everyday laborer, children, church folks, wealthy folks. All of these people would engage with the Crisis, but they would often, I think, engage with his fiction as well. I don't think that his fiction is as popularized, but I think at the time when things came out, I think people read them.
Thank you for that, Whitney. Whitney, the next question is about reception or public reception of the actual exhibition in Paris. Do we have a sense of how people both in Europe, other visitors, or in the United States reacted to the content? And if it had any impact in any regard on the kind of exhibits work that was done later? So the ones that were in the US, 1904 in St. Louis, or 07 in Jamestown.
I think that it was a major shift. I haven't found a great deal about one-to-one responses to the exhibit necessarily. But there was a couple of articles that, before I talk about a couple of articles, the fact that the American Negro exhibit almost won every prize it was qualified to win was a testament to the strength of the exhibit, and the reaction and response of the judges, I would hope, would be in some ways reflective of the public. I don't 100%, and I can't, it's not in the book, don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure that it was received in a way that was probably shocking to not Du Bois. I think Du Bois expected, because I'm great, and this is, of course, this information the world should know, and that that's that. But I think that the response is that it had a lot of visitation. I know that it had many people coming to it, and it won awards. And the thing about it is one of the letters that I had in the slide presentation that I completely skipped was a letter that Du Bois wrote to Thomas Calloway, who was, his friend who invited him to be the curator of the exhibit, asking him for access to the exhibit itself, which was after it was shown a couple of places, as in two. It was say entombed. It was given to the Library of Congress, where it remains today. Thomas Calloway did not have an answer for Du Bois. He literally said, you're going to have to contact the Library of Congress, and perhaps they'll give you permission. We have no other letters, no other correspondence that indicate that Du Bois pursued it any further. But we know that Du Bois never really used data visualizations the way he did in that 1900 exhibit, and it was never on display again. And so what happened to it, I don't know, I mean, why? I mean, I kind of know because I think it would have not been received as positively as it was in Paris. And again, I don't have any evidence for that, but it is at the Library of Congress. It is very fragile, apparently, because Britt and I definitely tried to get access to it, to do a reception. We wanted to, like, we'll do it in the Library of Congress. We'll just have a little space. We won't touch anything, you know, but they will not. They have not to this point let it go to anyone. And so that's always, and Mabel Wilson says the same thing. We do not understand why it's held so tightly, and even Du Bois could not get access to it. But I do know that it was heavily visited and awards were won. So my assumption is that it was well received in Paris.
Thank you for that, Whitney. And Whitney, just as a final question, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the Du Bois collection that you have there at UMass Amherst that the center is connected with, especially for the students that are on the call today. It might be the kind of thing that they'd like to come see and work in the materials.
Right. So W.E.B. Du Bois passed away in 1963 in Accra. Not that much later after that, Kwame Nkrumah was ousted as the president of Ghana. Shirley Graham Du Bois, who was Du Bois's second wife, outlived him and then initially moved to Cairo, Egypt, and she moved all of the stuff to Cairo. Eventually, for some period of time, she came to actually UMass Amherst and taught at the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of Afro-American History for a brief time. Her son, who was also adopted by W.E.B. Du Bois, David Graham Du Bois, also taught at UMass Amherst. And it was at that point, our first African-American chancellor, Rudolph Brommery, approached Shirley Graham Du Bois about the Du Bois papers. And, you know, initially it's like, well, they should be at Harvard. But Shirley Graham Du Bois always attested that she felt her husband would have wanted his collection in a public institution, accessible, not, you know, not limiting people's engagement with the work. And she became the steward of his legacy after his death initially. Ironically, the Shirley Graham Du Bois papers are at Harvard, but that's another story. So it actually, Randolph Brommery traveled to Egypt to physically accompany all of those papers back to Amherst, Massachusetts. And he tells a wonderful story that we have a video of, and if you go to the Du Bois Center website, you can see Chancellor Brommery talking about obtaining the papers and how he almost didn't get out of Egypt. Very, very fun and amazing story, but a little scary all the same. But also, so Du Bois becomes kind of the foundation, the focal point for our special collections, which is dedicated to social justice and transformation. And so we have, you know, his premier biographer, David Levering Lewis. His papers are here. We have Shirley and Du Bois's lawyer, Bernard Jaffe. His papers are here, and the correspondence are amazing. And everything that Du Bois, all the things that are paper-based and photograph-based are all digitally accessible. But I would, you know, encourage anyone who wants to travel to Massachusetts in the summer or the spring, that, because it's cold here, that to come to special collections, because you can see and touch, and the physical, as an archaeologist, the material itself is so much more sexy than a digital, than a screen. But we have a number of collections that are kind of attracted to our institution because of Du Bois. And we are very proud. I mean, there's tens of thousands of pieces of material that Du Bois written, you know, everything from receipts, birthday cards, to you know, the notes from the writing of the souls of Black folk. And it's good because you can see him editing himself, that, okay, he wasn't a perfect writer. So those are the kinds of amazing gems that we have here at UMass-Amherst.
It's a stunning collection. You really get that sense of just how wide-ranging his intellect was and the volume of writing that he produced. My students this semester, after when your colleague Adam talked to one of our classes, the materials that he was able to give us to work with, and it's just, it could have been written yesterday, just from
Yes.
how poignant and the depth of the knowledge that was present there. Well, Whitney, thank you so much for your presentation tonight and for taking time to answer all of our questions. And that sense of appreciation is not just from me, but on behalf of Roanoke College and the Center for Studying Structures of Race. It really was deeply appreciated. So thank you for your remarks.
So much for inviting me. Thank you for having Emancipation Week. I wish more of us in this country would acknowledge it. And I've been to emancipation celebrations in the Caribbean, but it's a little different here. So we're thankful for Juneteenth, but Emancipation Week is something that we all need to kind of incorporate into our daily lives here.
Yeah. Thank you, Whitney, and thanks to our audience for attending. Yeah.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, good night.
Thanks, Tanya.
Uh-huh.
Take care.